She slid the paper across her kitchen table, like she was passing the salt. Sign the bottom. Honey, there is nothing left. Anyway, you know how we do it. Family doesn't keep score. 5 years. I'd lived in that house. 5 years I changed those sheets and measured out those pills and left the hall light on every single night so my grandmother wouldn't wake up in the dark and forget where she was. I never saw $1 for any of it. Here is what my aunt didn't know that morning. The loan that supposedly ate the whole estate, the one she said left nothing, was taken out with a signature my grandmother could not physically have made. On a day I can prove she was lying in a hospital bed 2 towns over, I left that house with a tin of recipe cards and $41. Today, I read wills and powers of attorney for a living. I am a probate paralegal. Probate is just the court process that sorts out what a dead person owned and owed. And I can tell you a forged signature the second I see a hand. I loved didn't make it. Last year, I finally pulled the file on my own grandmother, and I made every stolen year land exactly where it belonged. Lawfully, to the dollar. My name is Nora. I am 34. If you have ever been the one your family counted on and counted for absolutely nothing, stay with me, because the kindest thing I ever did inside that house turned out to be the very thing that set me free. Let me take you back. But I need you to hold on to 2 things before I do, because they come back around at the end, and they matter more than they look right now. The first is a light. The second is a box of index cards with a dead woman's handwriting on them. Both of those things are about to save my life. 5 years before the morning my aunt slid that form across her table, I carried 2 suitcases up the front steps of a brick house on Eastwood Avenue and told myself it would only be for a while. I was 22. I had a spot lined up in a medical billing program at the community college, and a boy who kept asking me to move in with him. Then my grandmother, her name was Ruth, started leaving the stove on. Then she started calling me by my mother's name. Then she wandered 4 blocks in her slippers on a January night, and a neighbor drove her home. And the family had a meeting. I want you to notice how these meetings always go, because I bet you already know. There were 6 adults in that living room. 3 of them had jobs they called important. 2 of them had small children. And then there was me, 22. No husband, no kids. A college plan nobody in that room thought was serious. My Aunt Sylvia sat with her hands folded like she was at church and looked directly at me. You are the one without all the obligations, she said. She said the word gently, the way you'd hand someone a coat. And you 2 were always so close. Family doesn't keep score. Nora, we just do what needs doing. That was the first time I heard the phrase. It would not be the last. By the end of that week, I deferred the billing program, told the boy I couldn't move in after all, and unpacked those 2 suitcases into my grandmother's spare room. Everyone hugged me and told me I was an angel. And here is the part I need you to catch, because it is the whole game. Within a month, my Aunt Sylvia had herself named my grandmother's power of attorney. A power of attorney is just a document that lets one person legally sign for another when that other person can't. To make the money simple, Sylvia said, so you don't have to worry about any of that. You've got enough on your plate. So I did the sheets and the pills and the slippers and the stove, and she did the money. Remember that. Split. It runs under everything that comes next. Stay with me. because the first sign that the money wasn't simple at all showed up about 18 months later. And I walked right past it. 18 months into living on Eastwood Avenue. I was running the whole house. I want to be plain about what that means, because caregiving is a soft word for a hard thing. It means you sleep in 90-minute pieces. It means you learn to lift a grown woman who has forgotten she can't stand. It means you eat standing up and you cancel every plan twice, and your friends stop inviting you because you always say no. And then one day, they just stop. It means the world narrows down to one house and one person and one long hallway. That hallway is where the light comes in. My grandmother was afraid of the dark in a way that got worse. As her mind got thinner, if she woke at night into total blackness, she'd panic. She'd think she was a girl again, in a house that burned down before I was born. So every night, the last thing I did was reach up and switch on the little frosted fixture in the hall. The one between her door and mine. It threw a soft, yellow line under her door. If she woke, she'd see that line and remember she was home. I did that every night. For 5 years. Some nights, it was the only tender thing I had left in me. I'd flip that switch and stand there a second in the yellow of it. And just breathe. If you have ever kept a light on for someone who would not have done the same for you, I want you to comment the word "saving light" below. I mean it. I need to know I wasn't the only one standing in a hallway at 2 in the morning, keeping something safe that nobody would ever thank me for. So, 18 months in, an envelope came to the house, thick, from a lender I didn't recognize. I set it on the counter for Sylvia, the way I set all the mail, because she handled the money. But it slid, and it opened, and I saw 2 words at the top before I looked away out of pure habit. Home equity, asterisk. I asked her about it that Sunday, kept it light. Grandma's house is paid off, right? What is the equity letter about? Sylvia didn't even blink. Solicitation, junk. They send it to every old house on the block. She smiled and refilled my coffee. You worry about her. I'll worry about the paper. And you know what? I let her. Because I was 23 and exhausted, and she was the calm one. The competent one. The one who folded her hands like she was at church. That is how it works with people. Like Sylvia, they don't scream. They pour your coffee. Their cruelty comes with a napkin under it. I did notice one small thing, though, and I filed it away without knowing why. The electric bill for the house on Eastwood came addressed to me. My name, because I'd set up the account when Sylvia said she didn't want to be bothered with utilities. Every month, my name on the light bill for that house. Hold on to that, too. It is small. It comes back. Here is where it turns. Because about 3 years in, the money stopped being invisible and started being a wall. 3 years into it, the reimbursements dried up. For a long time, the arrangement had a thin coat of fairness on it. I paid for groceries and supplies out of my own little checking account, and once a month Sylvia would settle up, hand me a few folded bills across the same kitchen table. Always a little short, always with a sigh. Like generosity was a muscle. I kept making her pull. Then, in the 3rd year, even that stopped. I'd text her the total. She'd read it. I could see the little check mark and say nothing. When I finally asked, face to face, she got very quiet and very sad and said, "Money's tighter than you know. Nora, I am carrying a lot. you don't see. I didn't think you were the type to keep a tally on your own grandmother. Family doesn't keep score. So, I got a night job. 3 nights a week, I stocked shelves at a warehouse store from 10 p.m. to 2 in the morning, while a neighbor girl sat with Grandma. And I paid the neighbor girl out of the warehouse money, which meant I was now paying to work so that I could pay for the woman I was already caring for around the clock. Read that twice, because I lived it, and it still doesn't sound real. And still, every night I came home, I reached up and flipped that hall light on. Whatever else got taken, my grandmother woke up to that soft, yellow line. That, at least, was mine to give. There was one more thing. From that year, one clear afternoon, my grandmother was lucid. She had windows. Still, hours where she was completely herself. And she took my wrist with both her hands. And she looked at me with her whole face. And she said, "Don't let her sell my house, Nora. This house is yours. I fixed it. So it is yours." I told her nobody was selling anything. I thought it was the disease talking. It wasn't. And my house. Remember that? She said to Indy, "I fixed it, so it is yours." Asterisk. Remember that she believed that. We're going to find out what she actually signed and what got signed later in her name. And the distance between those two things is the entire crime. Stay with me. Because the last 6 months are where the real forgery lives. And where I met the one person who gave me the sentence I have carried every day since. The last 6 months. My grandmother went to the hospital 3 times. The third time was March. I remember the month because of the daffodils in the parking strip. And because of the woman in the blue scrubs. Her name was Fran. She was the hospice nurse. Hospice is the care they bring in when a person isn't going to get better, only more comfortable. And Fran came to the house twice a week in those final weeks. And she was the first adult in 5 years who looked at TUMI. Instead of through me. One afternoon, I was in the kitchen crying as quietly as I knew how, running the tap so the sound would cover it. And Fran came in and didn't try to fix anything. She just leaned on the counter next to me and let me finish. Then, she said, the thing. "Honey," she said, "you can pour yourself out for somebody and still keep the cup. Loving her was never supposed to cost you your whole name." I didn't understand it yet. I want to be honest. That day it just washed over me. But I wrote it on the inside of my head and I have carried it ever since. And there's a version of this story where I never got out of that house. And the only reason there isn't is a woman in blue scrubs who told me my name was worth keeping. Here is the fact that becomes the hinge of everything. That third hospital stay in March. My grandmother was admitted on a Tuesday, and she did not come home for 9 days. She was, for most of those 9 days, nonverbal. She could not have written a grocery list. I know the exact dates because I slept in the vinyl chair beside her bed for all 9 of them, and the parking receipts were how I later reconstructed it. Receipt by receipt, 75 cents a day. $41 total in a plastic bag I kept out of pure habit. $41 in parking. Hold that number. It is the same $41 I walked away with. That is not a coincidence I arranged. That is just how tight the bottom of my life got. The exact price of 9 days beside her bed was the exact size of everything I had left. My grandmother died on a Thursday morning at 7:40 a.m. with my hand on her arm and the daffodils out the window. She was 81. I had just turned 27. I thought the hard part was over. I want to laugh now at how much I thought that. Because the hard part started the next morning, at the kitchen table, with the salt. The morning after the funeral, My Aunt Sylvia made coffee in my grandmother's kitchen and slid a single sheet of paper across the table toward me. There is just one thing to sign, honey, and then you can rest. The paper was a disclaimer of interest. That is a one-page form where an heir, a person entitled to inherit, signs away their share, on purpose, in writing. I didn't know the name for it then. I know it, in my sleep now. The house was mortgaged, Sylvia said, and she said it so softly, so sorrowfully, like she was breaking hard news to me instead of manufacturing it. There was a loan against it, a big one. By the time the bank takes what it is owed and the lawyers take their cut, there is nothing left. It is actually underwater. Sweetheart, we all just need to sign off so the estate can close clean. And nobody gets stuck with the debt. You most of all. You've given enough. I remember looking at that page and feeling the floor tilt. A mortgage on a paid-off house. My grandmother's voice came up out of me. Don't let her sell my house. I fixed it so it is yours, Sam. And I opened my mouth, and Sylvia reached across and put her hand flat over mine. Warm, and said, Nora, don't turn this into something ugly. She is not even cold. Family doesn't keep score. So, I signed. I want you to sit in that with me for 1 second. Because if you've ever signed something you shouldn't have, a lease, a form, a whole marriage, just to make a powerful person in the room stop looking at you like that, then you already know exactly what my hand did without my permission. I signed. I gave away a house my grandmother swore she'd left me, because a calm woman poured me coffee and told me grief made me greedy. Then I stood up. I did one thing before I left. The only thing I took. On the counter by the window was my grandmother's recipe tin. A dented old caramel. Colored box stuffed with index cards, every one of them in her looping, left, leaning handwriting. 50 years of Sunday dinners in her own hand. I picked it up and held it against my chest. Sylvia watched me do it. Take whatever little things you want, she said, generous now that the big thing was signed. That is what family's for. I walked out the front door of the house on Eastwood Avenue with a recipe tin and $41 in parking money, and the clothes I had on. I did not turn around, and that night, in a motel room off the highway with the television murmuring, so I wouldn't hear myself think, I reached up out of 5 years of habit to turn on a hall light that wasn't there. That is the bottom. Now I am going to tell you how a woman with $41 and a box of recipes climbed all the way back. And then walked, calm as a Sunday sermon, right back into that estate. Stay with me. This next part is fast on purpose, because I refuse to spend on those years the way they spent on me. Here is the montage version, and I am giving it to you fast, the way it felt. First, a motel, then a rented room in a house with 4 other renters and 1 bathroom, a job at a call center, then a better one. I found the medical billing program I'd deferred at 22, still waiting for me. But I didn't take it. Something had changed in what I wanted. I'd spent 5 years being kept in the dark about paper, and I did not ever intend to be in the dark about paper again. So I took the paralegal certificate instead, nights and weekends, and I specialized. On purpose, with my jaw set. In estates and probate, in wills, in powers of attorney, in exactly the machinery that had been used on me. While I mopped a floor in the next room, I got a job at a small firm that did nothing but wind up the affairs of the dead. And I got good. I got fast. Wadi, I learned what a valid signature page looks like and what a fake one looks like. I learned that a notary stamp, the little inked seal a notary presses next to a signature to swear the signer was really in the room, has a date printed right on it. The date the notary's own license expires. I learned that if that expiration date has already passed, the stamp is worthless, and every document under it can come apart in your hands. I learned all of it, and for 6 years I did not touch my own grandmother's case. Not once. Once. People ask me why. I waited. The truth is, I wasn't ready. Not emotionally, and not the way I needed to be ready, which was completely. I had watched Sylvia operate. She was patient, and she was careful, and she never left a thread loose. If I came at that woman half prepared, she'd fold her hands and pour me coffee, and I'd sign something again. I promised myself I would not move until I could not lose. I kept the recipe tin on my kitchen counter the whole time. Some nights I'd open it just to look at her handwriting. That leaning, looping hand, the capital R in Ruth's pot roast, with its long back leg, the way she always underlined the oven temperature twice. It was the warmest thing I owned. I thought that is all it was. A warm thing. I had no idea. I was looking at Exhibit A, and I want to be honest with you about one night, because I promised myself the story would be honest, even where it isn't flattering. The night I finally decided I was ready. The night I sat down and requested the first public record on my grandmother's estate. I did not feel powerful. I sat in my car afterward in a parking garage, and I cried, hard, alone, for the first time since the motel. Not out of grief. Out of something that had been held shut for 6 years. Finally, coming open. I cried it out in that concrete garage where nobody could see. And then I wiped my face, and I drove home. And I never cried about any of it again. Not through what came next. Not once. You, Howis. You'll see why that matters. Now, let me show you what was in the file. Because this is where the whole thing turns over. The first thing I pulled was public. Anybody entitled as an heir can request it. And despite that disclaimer, my standing to look was never in question. I want to be very clear about that, because it matters to how this ends. Everything I did from here forward, I did as Ruth's granddaughter, using records I had every legal right to see. I never once used my firm's access, or a client's file, to look into my own family. My job gave me the knowledge. It never gave me a shortcut. I did this by the book on purpose, because I planned to hand the book to a judge. Page 1 was the reverse mortgage. A reverse mortgage is a loan that pays out against a house the owner already owns free and clear. The money comes to you now. And the loan comes due when you die or move out. On a paid-off house, it is a way to turn a home into cash. In the right hands, it is a legitimate thing. For an elderly homeowner who needs income, in Sylvia's hands, it was a straw. The record showed that over 3 years, the last 3 years my grandmother was alive, the years I was stocking warehouse shelves at midnight to buy her adult diapers, someone had drawn $146,000 against the house on Eastwood Avenue. $146,000 against a house my grandmother had paid off with a lifetime of double shifts. I want you to feel that number, not just hear it. So let me put it in a body you can stand in. That is nearly the entire worth of the home. That is a paid-off house, quietly turned into 3 years of somebody else's spending money, while the woman who owned it forgot her own daughter's name, and the money never touched my grandmother's care. I had the receipts for her care. It was mine. Page 2 was the durable power of attorney. The document that gave Sylvia the right to sign for Ruth. That is the master key. Whoever holds that can move the money, and I already knew Sylvia had held it since the first month. That part wasn't a surprise. The date was the surprise. The reverse mortgage authorization. The specific document that opened the tap was signed under a fresh power of attorney, dated the Tuesday of that March. The Tuesday my grandmother was admitted to the hospital. The first of the 9 days, she lay nonverbal in a bed, while I slept in the vinyl chair beside her, feeding a parking meter 75 cents at a time. My grandmother did not sign anything that Tuesday. My grandmother could not hold a cup that Tuesday. I was there, and the parking receipts in the plastic bag I'd kept out of pure animal habit. 75 cents, 75 cents, 75 cents, put me, and therefore her, in that hospital on that exact date. The document said she was in an office, signing her house away. The receipts said she was 2 towns over. Dying. Both things cannot be true. That is the whole case, right there, in the gap between a form and a fistful of parking stubs. And then there was the signature itself. I pulled the image up next to the recipe tin on my counter. My grandmother's real hand, the leaning loops, the long-legged capital R, the double underlined temperatures. 50 years of it, right there in caramel-colored cardboard. And on the power of attorney, a cramped, upright, careful little Ruth that leaned the wrong way and lifted the pen in the wrong places and drew an R that stood up straight, like a stranger. I had spent 6 years learning to spot a hand that a loved one didn't make, and here is the terrible mercy of it. I didn't need the training. Any granddaughter who'd read those recipe cards 1,000 times would have known in half a second. That wasn't her. That was somebody doing an impression of her. But a handwriting opinion is soft. Sylvia could hire an expert to say maybe. Could argue a sick old woman's handshakes. I needed something that didn't care about opinions. I found it on page 3. And page 3 is where a careful woman finally got sloppy. The notary stamp. Every one of those documents was notarized, sworn to by a notary who pressed an inked seal beside the signature to certify that Ruth was really there, really signing, in the room. And that seal, like I told you, has the notary's license expiration date printed right into it. The date on the stamp had already passed by almost 2 months. The notary's own commission, their legal authority to notarize anything at all, had expired 7 weeks before the day they supposedly watched my grandmother sign her house into a stranger's pocket. A notarization by an expired notary is not weak evidence. It is not a matter of opinion. It is void. And when the notarization is void, the power of attorney it certifies is void. And when the power of attorney is void, every single thing done under it, the reverse mortgage, the $146,000, all of it is void, too. It comes down like a wall with the bottom brick pulled out. It doesn't matter how calm you are, or how you fold your hands. Expired is expired. Sylvia had built her whole quiet empire on a stamp that had died 7 weeks before she used it. I sat at my kitchen counter with the recipe tin open and the file spread out, and I did not feel like screaming. I want you to understand that I felt the exact opposite of screaming. I felt still. I felt like a person who has been handed the one right tool after years of being handed the wrong ones. I closed the tin. I squared the pages. And I started very calmly to do my job. For myself, this time, for free, the way I'd done everything else in this family. If you've ever finally held proof of a thing everyone told you that you imagined, comment the word "though forward proof" below. Some of you have carried a knowing for years. With nothing in your hands. I carried mine for 11. I know what that first page feels like. Now, let me tell you how you take a careful woman apart without ever raising your voice. I did not call Sylvia. I did not send an angry message. I did not show up at the house on Eastwood. I filed. Here is the reckoning, and I am going to give it to you the way I gave it to them. In order, in numbered pieces, each one a door closing. 1. I filed a petition to reopen my grandmother's estate. When new evidence of fraud surfaces, an estate that was closed can be pried back open. And the disclaimer I'd signed at that kitchen table. Signed based on Sylvia's lie that the estate was underwater. Does not bind a person who was defrauded into signing it. I did not scream that she lied. I simply attached the reverse mortgage record, the hospital admission dates, and $41 worth of parking receipts in date order, and let the paper say it. 2. I filed a complaint with the state commission that licenses notaries, attaching the seal with the dead date, and the document it never had the authority to certify. I didn't editorialize. I let a government office discover, in its own time and its own words, that a notary in its charge had stamped a house away with an expired license. 3. I filed a caregiver's claim against the reopened estate. A caregiver's claim is a bill. The person who did the caring is allowed to present it to the estate the way any other creditor presents a bill for services. I had the electric account in my name for 5 years. At that address, proving I lived there. I had the neighbor girl who'd sat with Grandma so I could work nights, willing to swear to it. I had the hospice records with my name in them as the caregiver present. The claim itself was simple to price, and I priced it the cold way. The way the county prices a stranger to do the same job. $2,000 a month. 54 months of documented. Live in care. $108,000. Let me set that number down beside you, gently. Because it isn't really a number. $108,000 is 4.5 years of my 20s, valued at the going rate for a stranger. And I hadn't been a stranger. I'd been the granddaughter who left the light on. Then, I asked for one meeting. Not a confrontation. A meeting with lawyers. On the record, Sylvia came in still folding her hands, like she was at church. She'd hired a good attorney. I'll give her that. She stayed careful to the end. She opened her mouth to start in on grief and family. And how could I do this to the people who raised me? I didn't argue with her. I want to tell you clearly, because the whole shape of my life used to be arguing with that woman in my own head. I did not argue. I informed. 4 sentences. In order. The notary's commission expired 7 weeks before the date on the power of attorney. That makes the power of attorney void. That makes the reverse mortgage you drew under it your personal debt, not the estate's. And I have parking receipts and hospital records, placing Ruth in a bed the day the document says she was in an office. Then I stopped talking. And for the first time in my entire life, in a room with my Aunt Sylvia, I let the silence belong to me. She started to say my name. I let it sit there in the air. And I did not pick it up. Here is where her world contracted, and I am going to lay the pieces out flat and plain. Because you earned the release, and I am not going to mumble it. The State Commission's finding came first. In writing. On letterhead. The notary's commission was revoked. An official record now says, in the government's own words, that the seal on those documents was invalid. That was the brick. The wall came down behind it. With the power of attorney void, the reverse mortgage could not be a debt of a woman who never authorized it. The lender's claim against my grandmother's estate collapsed, and the liability for $146,000 in drawn funds landed on the person who had actually drawn it and actually spent it, Sylvia. She had told me the house was underwater to make me sign it away. In the end, the water rose over exactly one person, and it was her, and the estate, reopened, cleaned of a debt that was never really its own, was no longer underwater at all. It was a paid-off house, and what remained of a life. My caregiver's claim was recognized in full. I did not get everything. I want to be honest about that, because these stories lie to you when they tell you the ledger ever balances all the way. But I got my $108,000 for the years I gave, and the house my grandmother swore with both hands around my wrist that she had fixed. So it is mine. Went in the end to the granddaughter who left the light on. Sylvia did what people like Sylvia do. When the paper stops protecting them, she stopped, folding her hands. She called. She called 11 times in 1 week. I know because I saved the log the same way I save everything now. Out of pure habit, turned into strategy. She left voicemails that started sad and turned sharp and never once, across 11 of them, contained the word, sorry. She sent an email about how I'd torn the family apart, how Grandma would be ashamed, how family doesn't keep score. Family doesn't keep score. I want you to understand something about that sentence, because she'd used it on me for 11 years, like a hand pressed flat over mine. She was right, in a way she never meant. She counted on it. She built the whole thing on the certainty that the granddaughter mopping the floor would never keep a tally, that I'd never save a parking receipt, that I'd never learn what a notary stamp was, that love, in me, would stay soft enough to steal from. So I answered her email with one line, and then I never answered again. You are right. Family doesn't keep score. But I do. For a living now. I kept it for both of us. And I turned my phone face down on the counter, next to the recipe tin. And I made dinner. Here is how it actually ends, and it isn't a reunion. Because I don't do the cheap ones. I did not get my family back. Let me say it flat. Because I think some of you need to hear that this can be the ending. And still be a good one. There was no tearful table where everyone admitted they were wrong. Sylvia has never apologized. And I have stopped waiting for a thing that was never coming. Most of those 6 adults from the living room went quiet. The way people go quiet when the calm one they always trusted turns out to have been the danger all along. I don't chase them. I have my time back. I have my name back. The one Fran told me in a kitchen full of running tap water was worth keeping. That turned out to be enough. It turned out to be more than enough. But there was one thread I got to keep. And I want to end on her. My cousin Emmy, Sylvia's own daughter, was a teenager back in the Eastwood years, and she used to slip into Grandma's room and sit with us on the bad afternoons and never told her mother. She was the only one who ever looked at me the way Fran did. A few months after all of it, a small package showed up at my door with no note on the outside. Inside was a single recipe card in my grandmother's real hand. The leaning loops, the long-legged R, the double underlined oven temperature. Ruth's pot roast. Emmy had taken it from the house years ago, the way I took the tin and kept it. And now she was giving it back to the person she thought should have it. The note inside said only, Portia, Auenhowen, she really did fix it, so it was yours. I heard her say it. I am sorry it took so long for the rest of us to catch up. Asterisk, so. Let me give you back the two things I asked you to hold. The hall light. For 5 years, I left it on out of somebody else's fear. Standing in a dark house, keeping a frightened woman safe. I don't have that house anymore. But I have my own place now, and I leave a small lamp on in my hallway. Every single night. And not because anyone's afraid, I leave it on because I can. Because it is my light in my hall in a house that no signature can take. And every night when I flip that switch, I am telling the 22-year-old who unpacked 2 suitcases into a stranger's crime that she made it out, that the tenderness wasn't wasted, that the light was always going to lead somewhere. It just took 11 years to lead home. And the recipe cards. For 6 years I thought they were only warmth, a dead woman's handwriting. A soft thing to hold, but a hand you love 1,000 times is a hand you can never be fooled about. The warmest thing I owned turned out to be the sharpest. The recipe tin didn't just feed me, it testified. 50 years of Sunday dinners in her own hand became the reason a forged one couldn't stand. She protected me from the grave with pot roast and double underlined ovens. And she never knew she'd done it. And I will spend the rest of my life setting that tin on every kitchen counter I ever own. Fran was right. You can pour yourself out for somebody and still keep the cup. I poured out 5 years. I kept the cup. And it turned out the cup had my whole name written on the bottom of it the entire time. If you made it all the way here with me, if you've ever been the one who was counted on and counted as nothing, the one who kept the light on for people who'd have left you in the dark, do me one favor. Go turn a light on somewhere in your home tonight. One you don't strictly need. Leave it on. Let it be yours. And know that keeping score isn't the opposite of love. Sometimes it is the only way love ever gets paid back. My name is Nora. I read signatures for a living, and the truest one I ever authenticated was a woman's whole heart, spelled out in a hand that no one could fake, telling me across 11 years, a locked box of recipes, that I was hers, that the house was mine, and that the light I kept for her would one day be the light that brought me home. Leave it on.